You're standing in the grocery store, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. The kind of lighting that makes every choice feel cleaner, healthier, more intentional than it probably is. Your hand reaches for a bag of quinoa. The seeds inside slide and whisper against each other like dry sand in a bottle. The label says Superfood. Somewhere, someone once told you it's a grain. Your brain accepts that without protest. It cooks like rice. It sits in bowls like rice. It fills plates the way grains are supposed to. But then you remember something. That faint bitterness. That slightly soapy aftertaste you noticed once and never quite forgot. And suddenly the question slips in, quiet but persistent. If quinoa is a grain, why doesn't it behave like one? And why does it sometimes taste like it's trying to warn you about something? By the end of this, you'll know exactly what quinoa really is, why it can taste bitter, and how to choose the right kind in 5 seconds flat. Let's slow this down and unpack it. Quinoa's greatest trick is how convincingly it pretends to be something it's not. In the kitchen, it behaves like a grain. You boil it, you fluff it, you spoon it into bowls that feel familiar and comforting. That's enough for most of us. Our brains file it next to rice, oats, barley, and move on. But botanically, quinoa doesn't belong there at all. It isn't a cereal grain. It doesn't come from grass. It's a seed harvested from a flowering plant that's more closely related to spinach and beets than to wheat. That makes quinoa a pseudo-cereal, a word that sounds academic but simply means grain-like but not a grain. And once you see it that way, everything else about quinoa starts to click. There's a visual clue hiding in plain sight. When quinoa cooks, each tiny bead splits slightly and releases a pale, curly thread that wraps itself around the seed. It looks like a little halo or a loose spiral. That isn't decoration. That's the germ, the part of the seed that would grow into a new plant. Rice doesn't do that. Wheat doesn't do that. But seeds do. That single detail quietly reveals quinoa's true identity. It isn't just being cooked, it's waking up. And once you notice that ring, quinoa stops feeling generic. It becomes specific. And specific foods always have a story. The story begins far above sea level, in the Andes Mountains of South America, where farming is less about convenience and more about survival. Thin air changes everything. Nights drop cold fast. Winds scrape across the land. Soil is stubborn and unforgiving. For thousands of years, people living in this environment needed crops that didn't complain. Crops that could handle extremes without collapsing. Quinoa was one of those crops. It thrived where others struggled. It tolerated frost. Didn't panic during drought. It grew in poor soil and still delivered nourishment. Over time, it became more than food. It became reliability. For Andean communities, quinoa wasn't trendy. It was essential. It anchored diets the way wheat anchored Europe or rice anchored Asia. It fed families at high altitudes where options were limited. There are stories of early rulers ceremonially planting the first quinoa seeds of the season, not because quinoa was exotic, but because it mattered. It represented continuity, a plant that could be trusted year after year in an unpredictable landscape. When food keeps people alive long enough, it earns respect. So why did quinoa remain invisible to much of the world for so long? It wasn't because it lacked value. It was because history doesn't distribute foods evenly. Geography kept quinoa local for centuries. A mountain crop doesn't travel easily. And then, power reshaped the menu. When colonial systems moved in, new crops were introduced, and old ones were quietly sidelined. Wheat and barley carried prestige. Indigenous foods were framed as backward or inferior. Quinoa didn't disappear overnight. It faded slowly, pushed to the margins by economics, politics, and shifting ideas of what counted as proper food. But quinoa never vanished completely. It stayed alive in home kitchens, in rural fields, in recipes passed down without needing validation from outside markets. And then, much later, something strange happened. Scientists started paying attention. Researchers noticed quinoa's resilience, its nutrient density, its ability to grow in hostile environments. At the same time, global transport made it easier for foods to move long distances. Quinoa re-entered the world through labs, journals, and eventually health food stores. This time, it arrived with a new name: Superfood. That word does a lot of work. It compresses centuries of farming, adaptation, and culture into a single marketing hook. And to be fair, quinoa earned some of that attention. Nutritionally, it's impressive in a way that actually makes sense. Quinoa contains all 9 essential amino acids, which makes it a complete protein. That's rare for plant foods. It doesn't mean quinoa replaces everything else, but it does mean it can carry more weight in a meal. A bowl of quinoa isn't just filler, it contributes. It's also naturally gluten-free, which makes it especially valuable for people who can't rely on wheat. Quinoa doesn't try to imitate bread or pasta. It offers a different foundation entirely. Add fiber, minerals, and antioxidants, and you start to see why researchers were interested. But here's the key detail most labels miss. None of this is accidental. Quinoa evolved this way because it had to. Plants that survive harsh environments tend to build internal resources. Nutrient density isn't magic. It's adaptation. That adaptation shows up in texture too, which is why quinoa isn't just one thing. White quinoa is the mildest and softest once cooked. It fluffs easily and blends into dishes without demanding attention. Red quinoa holds its shape. It has a nuttier flavor and more bite, which makes it ideal for salads where you want definition. Black quinoa is earthier, chewier, and more assertive. It takes longer to cook and doesn't apologize for being noticed. Same plant, different personalities. Then there's the moment that confuses people. The first unexpected bite. The bitterness. That faint, soap-like taste that makes you wonder if something went wrong. It didn't. That bitterness is part of quinoa's defense system. Quinoa seeds are naturally coated in compounds called saponins. These chemicals taste unpleasant to birds and insects. They act like armor, protecting the seed long enough to ensure the plant can reproduce. Humans can eat saponins safely, but our taste buds don't love them. That's why rinsing quinoa matters. Even when the package says pre-rinsed, a quick wash under cold water strips away what's left of that protective layer. Suddenly, the bitterness disappears. What tastes like a kitchen mistake is actually a survival strategy. A reminder that quinoa wasn't designed for us. We adapted to it, not the other way around. Resilience like that has consequences, and you usually see them at checkout. Quinoa often costs more than rice or wheat, and there's a reason. Growing quinoa isn't easy. It's frequently cultivated on steep terrain where machines can't do much. Harvesting is labor-intensive. Processing takes time. Seed heads are dense, packed with tiny beads that need careful handling. When you pay for quinoa, you're paying for effort, geography, and persistence. And yet, once it reaches your kitchen, quinoa is surprisingly cooperative. It doesn't demand culinary skill. 1 part quinoa to 2 parts water. Bring it to a boil, lower the heat, cover, and let it simmer. 15 minutes later, turn off the heat and let it rest. Fluff it with a fork, and you're done. If you toast it briefly before adding liquid, you'll deepen the flavor, a nutty aroma rising from the pot like warm cereal. As steam escapes, those pale rings appear again, curling gently around each seed, signing their name. From there, quinoa adapts to you. It works warm or cold, savory or slightly sweet. It can be milled into flour, pressed into flakes, even used in baking. And there's another detail that rarely makes the label: the leaves. Young quinoa leaves are edible, cooked like spinach in traditional kitchens. The plant doesn't just give seeds, it offers greens too. Suddenly, quinoa isn't a product. It's a whole organism, part of a living food culture. That's why calling it a superfood feels incomplete. Quinoa didn't earn its place because it trends well. It earned it because it's been useful in multiple ways for a very long time. Which brings us to the part that actually helps in real life: the 5-second rule. When you're standing in front of quinoa, remember this. If it cooks like a grain but comes from a leafy plant family, it's a seed. If it tastes bitter, rinse a bit. If you want soft and neutral, choose white. If you want structure, choose red. If you want depth and chew, choose black. That's it. No charts, no labels, just logic. Back in the grocery store, the bag of quinoa hasn't changed. Same clean design, same promise. But now you can see past it. You can imagine the thin mountain air that shaped those seeds, the kitchens that depended on them, the long detour that brought them here. Even the bitterness makes sense now. Even the price tag has context. And that tiny, pale ring, the one that curls free when quinoa cooks, becomes something else entirely. Not a flaw, a fingerprint. So the next time you rinse quinoa under cold water, you're not just prepping dinner. You're watching a plant set down its armor, turning something built for survival on steep slopes into something that rests easily beside a spoon. A small bead, yes. But if you know how to look, it carries a whole mountain. If you enjoyed this kind of quiet unpacking of everyday things, give the video a like and subscribe for more. And if there's another simple thing you've always wondered about, leave it in the comments.